The arrival the night air off Lake Michigan carried a weight that did not belong to spring. It was the kind of cold that clung to the marrow, a dampness that turned breath into mist even when the calendar insisted the frost should have broken weeks ago. Farmers in the countryside muttered about an unseasonable chill, but old men, with eyes sharpened by decades of winters, whispered a simpler explanation. Something unnatural has settled here. In 1854, when the great limestone mansion on the hill was consecrated as St. Mary's Convent, the air itself seemed to thicken. The bells rang bright that morning, but locals swore the sound did not carry far. Instead of echoing out across the flat fields, the tones seemed to fold inward, caught by the forest that pressed too close around the estate. The bell tower's shadow stretched long and thin across the soil, like a black scar carved into Wisconsin earth. And on that first night, the villagers said, the forest was not silent. Windows trembled with unseen knocks. Dogs howled at empty fields. One young boy, barely 5 years old, told his mother that he had seen black-robed women walking the edge of the woods before dawn, their eyes too pale, their steps too soundless. His mother hushed him quickly. It would not do to spread stories about Catholic nuns in a Protestant community already bristling with suspicion. But the boy never forgot that a mansion reborn, the building itself had once belonged to a lumber baron, a man who had grown rich felling the endless pines of the Wisconsin frontier. He had died suddenly, struck down, they said, by a heart attack while hunting. His widow sold the estate to the diocese at a fraction of its value. A blessing, said Bishop William Corder. A curse, whispered the Protestant farmers who lived nearby. The mansion had been remodeled to suit its new purpose. 3 wings stretched outward like arms raised in benediction. The eastern quarters for the sisters, the western wing for orphans and the infirm, the central body for prayer, work, and discipline. Behind it rose a small chapel whose spire clawed at the sky. Its Gothic windows were so narrow they looked less like stained glass than slits for arrows. Inside, candlelight revealed stone walls that sweated in the damp, corridors that swallowed sound, staircases that seemed to shift perspective depending on where one stood. Even the most faithful whispered that the convent had been consecrated too quickly, that its bones still carried the shadow of the baron who had built it. The sisters, the convent's spiritual leader was Mother Catherine Murphy. Tall, gaunt, and almost regal in her bearing, she commanded instant obedience. Her eyes were a strange color, an icy blue so pale that in candlelight they seemed nearly white. Even when she prayed, her gaze never softened. To the faithful, she was a woman carved by God's will. To the uneasy, she looked carved by something else entirely. Beside her were Sister Elizabeth Foster, plump and warm in appearance but with a smile that never reached her eyes, and Sister Margaret Clark, tall and thin with fingers that always smelled faintly of herbs and tinctures. Together they oversaw 20 young novices, Irish girls mostly, brought across the Atlantic with promises of salvation and purpose. Their voices, lilting with homesickness, filled the chapel at 3 a.m. prayers, chants rolling through the stone halls like waves against a cliff. At first, their presence was tolerated, even admired. They took in orphan children from the railway camps, fed the sick with thin broth, buried the dead with solemn hymns. Slowly, suspicion gave way to grudging respect. But inside the convent walls, a different story unfolded. The silence within the rhythm of convent life was meant to be holy: prayer, work, reflection, sacrifice. Yet something in the silences began to shift. Meals grew quieter, laughter at recreation hours withered, and the young nuns walked the halls like shadows, careful, watchful, as if afraid of their own footsteps. Mother Catherine's punishments grew harsher with each passing month. Kneeling on dried peas until the knees bled. Days of fasting for minor infractions. Public confessions demanded for the smallest slip of tongue. She watched her sisters with the intensity of a hawk, and none could meet her pale eyes for long without trembling. It was during one such silent supper that Sister Agnes O'Connor, barely 23, whispered to her friend Sister Bernardet, "Do you think the locals will ever trust us?" Her voice was low, trembling. But the only reply was the sharp crack of Mother Catherine's knuckles against the table. No one spoke again that night. The first disappearance on a fog-heavy April morning, the rhythm of prayer was broken. Sister Agnes did not appear at matins. Her absence carved a hollow in the line of black habits kneeling in the chapel. At breakfast, Mother Catherine announced with a cool finality, "Sister Agnes has been called to a mission in Minnesota. The Lord requires her elsewhere. We shall pray for her success." No one saw her leave. No one had heard her pack. Her few possessions, her rosary, her stockings, her cloak, remained untouched in her cell. Yet her bed was stripped bare, as if she had never existed. Sister Bernardet's spoon clattered to the floor. "But Mother," she whispered, "she told me nothing, The words froze as Mother Catherine's pale gaze locked onto her. Are you suggesting obedience to one's superior requires the permission of her fellows? The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush air from lungs. That night, in the dim dormitory, Sister Mary Collins noticed something strange. Agnes's cloak still hung by the door. No one traveling to Minnesota in April would have left it behind. She whispered to Sister Teresa Donovan, but Teresa only shook her head. Do not speak of it. We are watched. And indeed, they were at a door in the night. 3 months later, another nun vanished. Sister Bernardet herself. Again the same explanation, a reassignment, this time to Chicago. Again no farewell, no goodbye. But late one night Sister Mary heard it, footsteps outside her door, muffled sobs, a sharp whisper she knew as Mother Catherine's. You will come with us now. Make any sound and you will regret it. Then the scrape of something dragged across the floor. The sound of a muffled cry cut short. Silence. The next morning Bernardet's bed was empty. Mary tried to pray, but the beads slipped from her trembling fingers. In her heart, she knew what the others feared but would not dare say aloud. These women were not being sent away. They were being taken, and if she spoke too loudly, if she asked too many questions, she would be next. That night, as Mary lay awake listening to the creak of floorboards and the sigh of wind through the trees, a scrap of paper slid beneath her door. She waited until the footsteps receded before reaching for it with shaking hands. That hurried script, written on a torn page of a prayer book, were just 5 words. Something is wrong. Trust no one. Whispers in the walls. The convent bell tolled at dawn, its hollow clang bouncing across the Wisconsin plain. Yet to Sister Mary Collins, it felt less like a call to prayer than a warning. An iron voice reminding her that another day had begun in a place where women vanished without explanation. She had hidden the note beneath her mattress. 5 words, something is wrong. Trust no one. The message still burned in her thoughts, refusing to release her even as she mouthed the Latin psalms with the others. Each syllable caught in her throat, half prayer, half plea. When she dared glance at Mother Catherine, the Mother Superior's pale eyes seemed already fixed on her. Watching. Wang. The gaze was neither tender nor stern but something worse, an appraisal, the kind a farmer gives a cow before deciding its fate. Mary lowered her eyes quickly, praying the suspicion had not been noticed. A growing absence. By the summer of 1855, the convent felt thinner. The laughter of the orphans seemed muted, as though some unseen hand pressed against their throats. The gardens, once lively with chatter as the sisters worked, now echoed only with the scrape of hose through soil. Of the 20 novices who had arrived only a year earlier, 5 were gone. Each with the same pattern, absent at morning prayer, declared transferred by Mother Catherine, their meager belongings missing from their cells. But there were things that didn't add up. Letters from the missing sisters, supposedly written from faraway missions, began to arrive. The handwriting was neat but wrong. The words too stiff, too careful. They read less like letters from homesick young women and more like reports crafted to satisfy suspicion. And always, they ended with the same phrase, "Pray for me as I pray for you." It was the kind of closing that might pass unnoticed by most. But Mary had shared a bedcot with Sister Agnes for 6 months. She knew Agnes had always signed her letters to Ireland with, "Your foolish friend in Christ." Whoever wrote these new letters, it was not Agnes. The chapel incident one evening during Compline, Sister Teresa Donovan, the only one bold enough to speak openly of her doubts, stepped out of line. The chapel flickered with candlelight as the chant of Salve Regina filled the air. But Teresa's voice cracked, not with song but accusation. "Where is Sister Bernardet?" she demanded, her Irish accent sharp as a blade. We all know she did not leave. The chant faltered. Heads turned. A ripple of fear passed through the nuns. Mother Catherine did not flinch. Slowly she rose from her seat, her shadow stretching tall against the stone wall. "Sister Teresa," she said, her voice soft, cold, "to question God's will is to question the chain of obedience that binds us all. Do you wish to defy the Lord himself?" "I wish only for truth," Teresa replied, though her voice trembled. The punishment was immediate. Mother Catherine ordered her to the refectory floor, where she was made to kneel on cold flagstones through the night, arms outstretched in the shape of a cross, whispering prayers until her voice bled into hoarse silence. By morning, her lips were cracked and bleeding. 2 weeks later, she too was gone. The sound behind the door. Mary's fear grew sharper with every disappearance. She had begun to notice things others seemed too frightened to acknowledge. A rustling of papers when footsteps approached. A hurried closing of doors in the north wing, the part of the convent no novice was permitted to enter. One night, while sweeping the corridor outside the Mother Superior's office, Mary heard voices through the half-open door. She froze, broom braced in trembling hands. "The bishop asks too many questions," came Sister Elizabeth's voice, stripped of its usual warmth. Then by his silence again, Mother Catherine replied. "The cathedral fund is a hungry mouth. He will not refuse gold." "And the girl?" It was Sister Margaret now, her voice clipped, metallic. "She is almost ready. The doctor said she will fetch a higher price." Mary's heart stopped. Fetch a higher price. The broom slipped from her hand with a faint clatter. Inside silence fell. Then Mother Catherine's voice, cold as steel, "We are being watched. End this conversation." Mary fled before the door opened. The locked wing. Her suspicions reached breaking point when she began hearing cries at night. Not the cries of children, not the muffled coughs of the infirmary, but something lower, groans, choked sobs, voices trying to call for help and smothered before they could. The sounds always came from the locked north wing. Once, gathering courage, she pressed her ear to its heavy oak door. At first, only silence. Then, a whisper, faint, broken but unmistakably human. "Father, please, help us." She stumbled back, heart hammering. Who was inside? Sister's long thought transferred? The missing orphans. The next morning, during laundry duty, she found a stain on one of the habits being scrubbed. Not dirt. Not candle wax. But blood, faintly rusted into the cloth. When she asked whose it was, the older nun beside her only shook her head violently and whispered, "Do not ask. Do not ever ask." Seeds of fear began to rot Mary from the inside. She stopped sleeping fully, waking at the smallest creak. Every face seemed suspicious. Every glance could be a warning. And yet, she was not alone. One night, as she tended the chickens outside, she slipped a note into the pocket of Jimmy Fletcher, the milk boy. She pressed the silver cross into his palm. "Take this to Father Ryan," she whispered. "Tell no one else. Please." The boy nodded solemnly, his freckled face pale with the seriousness of her plea. That night, Mary prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. She prayed for courage. She prayed for deliverance. And she prayed that Father Ryan would believe her before it was too late. The prayers were not enough. Just days later, the cries from the north wing grew louder. Mary woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor and the scrape of something dragged along stone. She sat frozen in her narrow bed as the noise passed her door. A muffled cry rose, then choked off, swallowed by silence. Morning prayers. Sister Rebecca was gone. The explanation was given. A mission in the Dakota Territory. The words slid easily from Mother Catherine's tongue. Too easily, but Mary knew. She had heard the struggle. She had heard her sister's voice in the night, and then came the final blow. When she returned to her bed that evening, she found another scrap of paper waiting beneath her pillow. But this one was not a warning. It was a farewell. "Pray for me. They have chosen me next." The signature at the bottom made her knees buckle. It was Teresa's hand. That night, while sweeping the hall again, Mary heard voices behind the locked door. But this time she caught a new word. A name: "The Master will be pleased." The priest who wouldn't look away. The winter of 1856 pressed hard against Wisconsin. The lake froze into sheets of gray glass, and the convent walls seemed to draw the cold inward, so that no fire could truly warm them. To Sister Mary, the frost that clung to the windows looked like veins spreading across stone, like the building itself was alive, infected. And if it was alive, then its heart was in the north wing. The locked wing. Every night the muffled cries grew fainter, as though their owners were being worn down, drained away. And now there was that word, the one she could not stop hearing in her head, the Master. She didn't know who or what it meant, only that whenever it was spoken voices dropped lower, like conspirators muttering a forbidden name. Father Ryan's doubt. Miles away, in the parish of St. Joseph's, Father Thomas Ryan sat in his modest study, the flickering lamplight catching on the silver cross Jimmy Fletcher had delivered to him. He had read Sister Mary's hurried note a dozen times until the ink seemed to burn through the paper. "Something evil happens at St. Mary's. Nuns disappearing. I fear for my life. Please send help." It was not the first unease he had felt about the convent. Since its founding, he had watched its numbers dwindle strangely. Transfers without notice. Children adopted into silence. Mother Catherine's donations to the bishop far outstripped what a struggling frontier convent should have earned. But now, for the first time, he had proof, not in hard evidence, but in fear etched onto a scrap of parchment. Ryan closed the note, leaned back, and whispered aloud to the shadows of his study, "Lord, give me the courage to face whatever waits inside those walls." The price of silence. When Father Ryan brought his concerns to Bishop Henney, the reception was as cold as the February snow. Transfers are common in new institutions. the bishop said, pouring wine with steady hands. "Your young father. You mistake routine matters for conspiracy." "But your excellency," Ryan pressed, "the numbers do not match. 8 gone in less than 2 years. Families receive only form letters." "I have reason to believe," the bishop's gaze hardened. "Believe what?" "That a mother superior, hand-picked and generous to this diocese, is trafficking souls like livestock? Do you realize what you suggest?" Ryan's voice wavered but did not break. "I believe something unholy festers there." The bishop placed his glass down with deliberate calm. "Then pray for discernment, Father. And leave administration of the convent to your superiors." A week later, Ryan received notice of reassignment to a remote outpost near the Minnesota border. A silencing by distance. But he did not go. Instead, he began quietly gathering records, notes, even rumors whispered by parishioners whose daughters had vanished near the convent grounds. And the more he gathered, the darker the picture became. The locked door back at St. Mary's, Sister Mary could no longer eat. Every spoonful of thin broth tasted like ash. Every prayer was an act of theater, her lips moving while her mind screamed with visions of the missing. One evening, while polishing candlesticks in the chapel, she noticed a draft along the floor near the altar wall. Following it, she found a hairline crack where stone met wood. She pressed her ear to it, at first only silence, then a scraping like something heavy dragged across stone, followed by a faint groan. Her hands shook as she traced the seam. It wasn't just a wall. It was a passage. That night she dreamed of Agnes, her friend long gone, whispering through the crack, "We are still here." The visit of the stranger. It was spring of 1857 when a new figure arrived at the convent. A tall man in a long black coat, his boots gleaming like oil. He introduced himself as Dr. Matthews, a physician from Chicago, consulting on the health of the sisters. Mary saw him from the corridor, speaking with Sister Margaret in hushed tones. His hands were too smooth for a doctor's, his smile too rehearsed. When he passed her, the air smelled faintly of chemicals, chloroform. Though she would not know the name for years that night, the cries from the north wing were replaced by silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. By morning, another novice was gone. Father Ryan returns. Unable to ignore Mary's warning, Father Ryan rode to the convent under pretense of reviewing financial accounts. He found the place eerily subdued, only half the number of nuns he recalled from his last visit. Sister Elizabeth greeted him with her usual smile, though her eyes looked hollow. "We've had many transfers, Father. God's work spreads far." Ryan nodded, but his gaze wandered. In the orphanage he counted only 7 children where 20 had once been. In the infirmary he found bottles of laudanum, chloroform, and powders he did not recognize. And then came the moment that froze his blood. While walking past the north wing he heard it. A voice, weak, cracked, but unmistakably human. "Father, please." Ryan stopped, pressed his ear to the door. "Who's there?" he whispered. There was a shuffle inside, then another voice, lower, stern, silencing the first. The door rattled as if something slammed against it behind him. A cold voice cut the air. "Father Ryan, you should not be here." It was Mother Catherine. And beside her stood a hulking man he had never seen before, arms like tree trunks, eyes like stone. The master's name. The conversation that followed was brittle politeness. Ryan excused himself, claiming he had taken a wrong turn. Mother Catherine smiled thinly, though her pale eyes glittered with suspicion. The man beside her did not smile at all. As Ryan was escorted back to the chapel, he dared one last glance at the locked door. Carved faintly into the wood, almost invisible in the dim light, was a mark, letters scratched by a desperate hand. The rest unfinished. But Ryan knew what word it had been meant to spell, the same word that haunted Sister Mary's prayers. Master. That night, as Father Ryan prepared to leave, Sister Elizabeth slipped him a folded scrap of paper. Her hands trembled as she pressed it into his palm. "Take it," she whispered, "before she sees." He unfolded it once he was safely in his buggy. It was a list of names, every nun who had disappeared. But beside 3 of them, in neat, cold ink, was an added word: sold. The locked wing opens. The spring of 1858 arrived reluctantly in Wisconsin. The snow melted into black mud, and the air carried that damp, metallic smell that made the earth seem raw and unfinished. On the convent grounds, crocuses pushed up in the garden beds, pale flowers bending beneath the cold rain. But their blooms could not soften the heaviness that had settled over St. Mary's. Inside those walls, prayer sounded hollow. Even the chants seemed to drag with exhaustion, the young sisters' voices quivering like candle flames about to gutter out. The rhythm of their days continued: matins, work, meals, compline, but underneath something had shifted. The silence was no longer holy. It was watchful. It waited, and Sister Mary could not escape the certainty that she herself was being watched. Whispers in the hall. The convent's corridors were long, lined with narrow windows that let in slats of light like prison bars. Mary kept her eyes down, her rosary clutched in her hand as she moved between duties. Yet no matter where she went, she felt it, eyes on her back, a presence just beyond her shoulder point. One evening, she lingered near the cloister door, hoping for a glimpse of the world outside. That was when she heard them, two voices low and urgent, seeping through the cracks of Mother Catherine's office. "She suspects," came Sister Margaret's clipped tone. "Which one?" asked a man, gravelly, unfamiliar. "The Collins girl. The one with the letters." Pause. Then Mother Catherine's voice, calm, cold as stone. "Not yet. She's useful. Too plain for the patrons. Let her watch. Fear ripens slower that way." Mary pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. She stumbled away, her pulse hammering in her ears. Useful. The word struck her like a slap. They were waiting for her to rot from within before harvesting her soul. Father Ryan's dangerous allies miles away. Father Ryan studied the list Sister Elizabeth had smuggled to him. 23 names. Each one crossed with dates and notes. Transferred. Sent to mission. Illness. But 3 were branded with that single, chilling word. Sold. The priest knew this was beyond him now. The bishop had already silenced him once. To bring this into light, he would need voices louder than his OWN.so. He rode to Milwaukee, where tavern whispers and dockside rumors told of vanished girls, wealthy clients, and secret houses in Chicago. He sought out men who distrusted the church, Protestants who needed no urging to believe the worst. He did not relish their eagerness, but he used it. At last he brought his suspicions to Archbishop John Hughes in New York, bypassing his own bishop entirely. Hughes was no gentle soul. Stern, politically sharp, and unafraid of scandal if it meant protecting the larger church, he listened without interruption as Ryan laid out the disappearances, the silence, the ledger of names. When Ryan finished, Hughes leaned forward, eyes like steel. "You understand, Father, what you are saying could tear a diocese apart." "You are certain?" Ryan placed the folded list on the desk between them. "Certain enough to risk my soul." The Archbishop did not hesitate. "Then we will strike before they can hide it. Monsignor Kelly will go with you. And God help us all if what you say is true." The north wing breached at St. Mary's. Mary's terror grew unbearable. She could no longer pretend the missing had gone to distant missions. Their names whispered to her in dreams, their faces flashed at the edge of candlelight. On a rain-slick evening, while scrubbing the chapel floors, she saw her chance. Sister Margaret had left her keys hanging from a hook, too hurried in her movements as thunder rolled outside. Mary's hands trembled as she took them. She waited until night prayers ended, until the convent lay in shadow, until even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Then she crept to the north wing door. The lock turned with a heavy groan. Inside was darkness thick enough to feel. The smell hit her first, stale sweat, sickness, unwashed flesh. Then the sound, a weak moan followed by a rasping whisper, "Water, please." She struck a match. Its flame wavered, throwing shapes against the stone. And there they were. 5 women, gaunt and hollow-eyed, their habits torn, their hair matted. One stirred weakly, her belly swollen with child. Mary's knees nearly gave way. "Oh, sweet Lord," a hand clutched her wrist. Thin, claw-like, but desperate. "Don't let her take us again. Don't let the doctor." The match went out. And in that instant, Mary felt it, another presence in the room. Watching. Waiting. The inspection the next morning, chaos erupted at the convent gates. A carriage thundered in, bearing Monsignor Kelly, Father Ryan, and 2 priests from neighboring parishes. Their robes carried the Archbishop's seal. Mother Catherine was caught unprepared. Her composure faltered, just for a breath, before she smoothed her features into a mask of calm. "This is highly irregular," she said. Kelly's voice was iron. "Archbishop Hughes has authorized a full inspection. No area is exempt." The nuns froze like statues. Through an open window, Ryan saw 2 novices rushing armloads of papers to the kitchen stove. The acrid smell of burning parchment filled the courtyard. They were destroying the evidence. "Take us to the north wing," Kelly commanded. Mother Catherine's smile thinned. "That area is sacred enclosure." "Now," Kelly snapped. Elizabeth appeared then, wringing her hands, her usual smile gone. She stepped aside, her eyes full of something Ryan couldn't read. Fear, maybe even relief. The key turned. The heavy door swung wide, and the world inside changed forever. The room of the forgotten. The priest staggered back at the stench. The sight was worse. 5 women crouched in the gloom, their faces skeletal, their bodies wasted. They blinked at the light like creatures dragged from a cave. One tried to rise but fell to her knees, sobbing. Father Ryan crossed himself. Mother of God, Sister Rebecca, once a vibrant novice, whispered hoarsely, Father, you came back. Kelly knelt, his hands shaking as he gave her water. Who did this to you? Her lips cracked into a terrible attempt at a smile. The doctor. For the house in Chicago. They pay more for brides of Christ. Behind them, the captured nuns began to weep, the sound low and broken, like wind through a crypt. Mary stood frozen, her stomach twisting. She had opened the door, but part of her wished she hadn't, because some horrors once seen could never be unseen. The shadow of the master. While Ryan and Kelly tended to the captives, the other priests scoured the convent. In Sister Margaret's quarters, they found ledgers coated with words that were suddenly clear. Commissions, deliveries, packages. Each aligned with the dates of vanished nuns. And in the back, hidden in a drawer, lay letters sealed with wax. Letters not from Wisconsin, nor even from Chicago. Correspondence signed only with an ornate M. The letters spoke of orders, payments, shipments of sisters, to cities across the Midwest. Ryan read the last line aloud, his voice hollow. Prepare the next. The master comes in spring. Failure will not be tolerated. A silence fell over the priests. Even the rescued women seemed to shrink at the word. Mary whispered, almost to herself, He is real, and for the first time Father Ryan felt that this evil might not stop at St. Mary's. That what they had uncovered here was only the surface of something vaster, darker, and far from finished. As dusk fell, guards posted at the convent reported that one prisoner was missing. Mother Catherine, her cell stood open, the window locked from the inside, gone, as though she had never existed. On the floor lay a single scrap of parchment, ink smeared as if written in haste. The master is already among you. The covering of graves, the discovery should have ended it. Chains broken, victims freed, leaders dragged into courts of justice. But in 1858 Wisconsin, justice had to move through men of rank, men of money, men who prayed with one hand while hiding ledgers of blood with the other. And so, the truth of St. Mary's began to rot, not from lack of evidence, but because evidence itself can be starved until it withers into silence. The church strikes its bargain within days of Monsignor Kelly's raid. The surviving sisters were scattered to temporary shelters. Some were too weak to stand, their bodies wrecked by hunger, illness, and, though no priest dared say it aloud, violations unspeakable. Others wept without pause, clutching their rosaries until their nails bled. Father Ryan believed the church would now open its arms to these women. But when he met Bishop Henney in Milwaukee, he realized his naivety. The bishop's chambers smelled of incense and tobacco. Stacks of papers lay on his desk, most of them architectural sketches of the rising cathedral whose spires were meant to shame Protestant Milwaukee into awe. You've overreached, Henney said flatly, not looking up. Overreached? Ryan nearly choked on the word. Women were imprisoned. Sold. Buried in gardens like refuse. We have their bones. And you will have their souls saved, if you let the matter be handled by those above your station. Ryan slammed his fist on the desk, the crucifix rattling. You mean buried? The bishop's eyes flicked up, sharp as glass. Do you think the Protestants will not seize this scandal, Father? Do you think they will not trumpet it as proof of Rome's corruption, using it to strangle every convent, orphanage, and mission in this land? Better 20 guilty men go free than the church itself be made a whore for their ridicule. Ryan's voice dropped, almost a growl. And what of the women already made whores by Catherine's hand? The bishop did not answer. Instead, he signed a paper, sealed it, and handed it to Kelly. The convent is closed. The land will be sold. That is the church's answer. The survivors' silence in the weeks that followed. The rescued sisters were moved like fragile parcels across state lines. Each was assigned to distant convents, Philadelphia, Boston, New Orleans, under strict orders of renewed vocation. But the orders came with threats. Silence or excommunication. Silence or the eternal loss of one's soul. Sister Claire O'Donnell, her mind cracked from watching Teresa strangled, tried to speak to a Protestant newspaperman in Milwaukee. Days later she was bundled on a train east, her mouth stuffed with cotton as if her words themselves had to be gagged. Sister Josephine, heavy with child, begged to keep her baby. The church ruled otherwise. Her infant vanished into adoption records so altered that even Kelly himself could not trace them. She never recovered, and Sister Rebecca, skeletal and haunted, muttered to anyone who would listen, He isn't gone. Catherine served someone greater. He walks still. No one recorded her testimony in the diocesan archive. The burning of the ledger. Kelly had seized Catherine's ledgers, the financial books swollen with entries of sales. Sister Agnes, $400. Package delivered. Sister Teresa, unsuitable, terminated. But one night Ryan found Kelly staring at the fireplace of his inn, the ledger open in his lap. "They'll destroy me," Kelly whispered. "Archbishop Hughes believes me now, yes, but Henny has allies in Rome. If I publish this," Ryan leaned forward, "if you don't, they'll do it for you. And it will vanish forever." Kelly's face was a mask of grief. He tore one page free, an entry naming Special Commission, New Orleans, and thrust it into Ryan's hands. Then he tossed the rest into the flames. The parchment curled, blackened, then dissolved to ash. The smoke that rose seemed darker than ordinary smoke, as though it carried voices with it. Ryan clutched the torn page as though it were the last beating heart of the truth. Political shadows. News of the inspection leaked anyway. A Protestant paper published a scandalous story, Popish Convent a Brothel of Hell. It named no names but hinted at horrors, trafficking, buried bodies. For 2 weeks, Milwaukee seethed. Crowds gathered outside Catholic churches, spitting on priests, shouting, "Whoremongers." Stones broke windows. A Lutheran elder thundered from his pulpit, "See what Rome hides in her walls." But then just as swiftly the outrage cooled. The story disappeared from circulation. The presses claimed lack of evidence. The reporters who had interviewed Ryan suddenly recanted, saying they had misunderstood. What happened? Kelly knew. Wealthy Catholic donors had greased the presses. Judges had leaned on editors. And perhaps, though no one would say it aloud, the master had reached out his hand, unseen but heavy, the note that shouldn't exist. One damp morning, Ryan returned to his parish to find an envelope on his altar. No seal. No name. Just his own written across the front in a hand he recognized too well. Catherine's. Inside was a single line. "Do you think you cut the head from the serpent? Full. The serpent was never me." Beneath it, a second page. A list of names. Men of wealth in Chicago, St. Louis, New Orleans. Judges, bankers, even a senator. Ryan's blood chilled. These were not just clients. They were owners, and scrawled across the bottom, in ink so dark it looked almost like dried blood, "We serve the master still." A world that doesn't want truth. Ryan brought the letter to Hughes. The archbishop read it, sighed, and placed it in his drawer. "Your zeal does you credit, Father. But you must see we cannot fight this. Not now. Not here." "You mean you will not fight it?" Ryan said. Hughes folded his hands. "You are young. You still think the truth alone can move the world. But the world is stone. You will only break yourself against it." Ryan walked out, shaking, clutching the torn ledger page still hidden in his cassock. He thought of the women buried in the bean field. Of Rebecca whispering about the master. Of Catherine slipping through walls as though smoke could wear a habit. And he realized something worse than despair. The world didn't want the truth. That night, as Ryan prayed alone in his parish, a sound stirred outside, footsteps, slow and heavy. He rose, heart pounding. On his church door, someone had pinned a wooden cross. Not upright, but inverted, carved into the wood were 3 words, "We are coming." The master's shadow. The year was 1862. The convent of St. Mary's was rubble, the gardens where bones had been found plowed under, the land sold to a wealthy farmer who never once set foot on it at night. But the memory of what happened there did not fade. It spread in whispers, hushed tales told by midwives, old farmers, and orphans grown into parents who remembered the haunted eyes of nuns who cared for them. For Father Ryan, the memory had become a weight he could neither carry nor cast aside. The torn page, the page he had salvaged from Kelly's burning ledger, was folded so many times it had begun to fray. New Orleans, Special Commission. Names scrawled in codes only half-dashed deciphered. At first, Ryan believed this paper would be his weapon. But it was less a sword than a stone around his neck. Every time he tried to show it, to civil judges, to church officials, even to journalists, doors closed. Files went missing. Threats arrived on scraps of paper, always unsigned, always familiar. The master sees. By now he lived like a man already marked for death. The parishioners whispered of lights burning in his rectory at all hours, of the priest who muttered names in Latin that weren't in any psalm. Children said he spoke to someone invisible at his altar, pausing between prayers as if answering. Ryan had become what the church most feared, not just a witness, but a witness who would not forget. The vanishing survivors. By 1861, fewer than half the rescued sisters remained traceable. Sister Claire O'Donnell was committed to an asylum in Philadelphia, where she screamed every night at the pale eyes in the door. Sister Josephine had taken her life, leaving only a note stained with tears. I cannot forgive. Sister Maria Fitzpatrick withered in a contemplative convent, her mind wandering so often they locked her in her own cell for peace. Sister Rebecca disappeared entirely. One day she was at morning prayers in Boston. The next, her bed was empty, her habit neatly folded. The church said she had chosen a solitary life of penance. But the novices swore they saw men in dark coats waiting near the convent gates that same night. Ryan believed her taken back. Taken by them. The master emerges in late autumn of 1862. Ryan received a package delivered by a trembling boy who refused to give his name. Inside, a golden locket. He knew it instantly. He had seen it once dangling from Catherine's hand, a painted miniature of St. Mary's Convent, its bell tower rising like a sentinel. Now the glass over the painting was cracked, and behind the miniature, hidden in the locket's lining, was a sliver of parchment. On it, in that same dark hand as before, the convent was only rehearsal. The true house is prepared. Come see before we make it holy. The address was in New Orleans. Ryan's blood ran cold. For weeks he prayed for clarity, begged Kelly for support, even wrote to Hughes. The responses were silence, silence, silence. Finally he resolved to go alone. The house in New Orleans, the address led him to the Garden District, where iron fences coiled with ivy and houses looked like fortresses. The mansion at the end of the avenue stood dark, its shutters sealed, though faint candlelight flickered within. Ryan slipped past the gate under cover of night. The windows rattled in the humid wind. Somewhere within he heard it, not Latin chants but voices murmuring in a language he didn't know. Rhythmic. Full. Hungry. Inside, the air reeked of incense and blood. The parlor was lined with statues, saints but their faces scratched away, their crosses inverted. And in the center, a chair stood with ropes dangling from its arms. Not for prayer. For restraint. Ryan's heart pounded. He heard footsteps above. And then, a sound that froze him. Women's voices whispering together in broken unison. Some voices he recognized. Rebecca. Agnes. Teresa. Dead women. Or were they? He forced himself up the staircase, each step groaning beneath his boots. At the landing, he saw them. Or something that looked like them. The gathering a circle of women knelt on the floor, their habits gray with dust, their faces gaunt, hollow. Some were the missing nuns. Others were strangers, young and pale, eyes glassy as dolls. They rocked in rhythm, whispering in that strange tongue. At their center stood a tall figure in a hood. Not Catherine. Not Margaret. A man. The master. When he spoke, Ryan felt his bones vibrate. You priests think you broke us. But we are not broken. We are legion. You see one convent, one house. I see an empire. Across every city, behind every altar, every orphan's tear. And still you clutch your little cross, thinking it a weapon. Ryan raised his crucifix. In Christ's name, but the master only smiled. Pale eyes gleamed under the hood, too pale, too wide. Christ. His voice dropped to a hiss. Do you think he walks these halls? No. Only I do. The women's whispers rose, a drone that seemed to thicken the very air. Ryan stumbled, the crucifix heavy in his hand. For a moment he thought he saw Teresa's face lift, her lips part as if begging him to stop. Then her eyes went blank again. Ryan's last stand, he staggered forward, clutching the torn page from the ledger like a relic. You traffic flesh. You bury women like weeds. But their names live. And I speak them now. And he did. Every name. Sister Agnes. Sister Bernarde. Sister Teresa. Sister Mary. One by one he forced their names into the air, each syllable cracking the master's rhythm. The women faltered, their chants stuttering. One sobbed aloud, the master roared, and for the first time Ryan saw his face clearly. Pale blue eyes, sharp features. Catherine's features, but wrong, twisted, stretched onto a man's skull. Not human. Or not entirely. Ryan pressed the crucifix forward, voice breaking as he shouted the names again, louder, louder, until the room seemed to quake with them. The women shrieked, the circle breaking apart. And then the candles blew out, darkness swallowed the house. The aftermath weeks later, neighbors whispered of an explosion, fire consuming the mansion in one night, leaving only scorched bricks and a foundation that stank of smoke for months. Of Father Ryan, there was no trace. Only his journal, found singed but intact in the charred ruins. The last page ended mid-sentence. I see them, their faces are, nothing more. The church declared Ryan drowned in the Mississippi on private travel. The mansion's remains were quietly cleared. No record of the women found inside was ever filed. But survivors in New Orleans whispered of strange figures wandering the streets at dusk. women in habits, pale-eyed, their lips moving with words no one could understand. A legacy of silence. By the end of the century, the St. Mary's case was a ghost of a rumor. Records sealed, reports destroyed, even the memorial crosses in the convent's graveyard uprooted. Only fragments remained, a water-damaged letter here, a farmer's story there. Enough to haunt but never to convict, yet every so often a relic surfaced. In 1912, workers in Veracruz found two mummified bodies seated at a table with poisoned tea. Women resembling Catherine and Margaret, though no proof survived. In 2018, a box unearthed near Lake Michigan contained a rosary and a list of 23 names. Remember us. And in the Fletcher family farmhouse, a single silver cross still hangs. Passed down for 5 generations, it bears the faint scratch marks of a desperate nun who trusted a farm boy with the truth. Every Easter the family gathers, lights a candle, and reads aloud the names from the convent. The twist that lingers, yet the story never dies. Construction workers in New Orleans claim that when they dig near the old Garden District mansion site, they hear voices rising from the soil. Women's voices chanting in rhythm. And in Wisconsin, some say that on foggy nights near the former grounds of St. Mary's, you can hear the chapel bell toll once, though the tower has been gone for more than a century. But the most chilling are the letters, anonymous, arriving at random convents across America. Each bears the same message in the same hand: we serve the Master still.